Part 1, Mind and Body. So we're covering a theme here, or two themes, the mind and the body. We're also covering a time span from 1550 roughly to 1750, and we will skip around a little bit more than that. But um, in this chapter, kind of like the last two chapters, our author Lazari is covering some different time frames and kind of within different cultures. Okay. But the theme is the mind and the body. So the first part we're going to look at is the portrait. So how is the body social, and how is the mind and body intertwined, and how do these representations of the physical nature of the body change in different styles of artwork, different time periods, and different cultures? Okay, so we're gonna look at Nefertiti. Now, Nefertiti, in this particular sculpture, we did look at. If you remember chapter 8, we looked at the Ba and Ka, and we think about King Tut's tomb. It's very different than this style of artwork. In Nefertiti's depiction, we get into a much more naturalistic and realistic portrait here of her in dimensionality. Different material too. This is plaster and I think marble. Does it tell us? It's a mixed media piece, but it's got some plaster add-ons here. Now it is made somewhat sturdy, in a sturdy kind of a way, but not to the level where other Egyptian statues are made, where if you can see the breakage on her ears, that wouldn't really be that the ears would have been sculpted in the stone. If you know what I'm saying, we wouldn't have shown those sticking out like that. So I'm going to talk about. I'm going to digress for a moment just to talk about sculpture and the longevity of it. So when you have stone, stone is very strong, of course, but it is brittle. So if you hit it or there's an earthquake, there's no earthquakes in Egypt that I know about, but things happen. People come into the tomb, bump things around. It's very easy to chip or break something, or even moisture or atmosphere in the area could cause some problems. Egypt, because it's a desert culture, not unlike our Mojave Desert, is very similar to that. Death Valley, you could think of that as well. So it's very dry and preserves paint, preserves pigment, preserves sculptures, all kinds of things because the moisture is not getting in there and soaking into the material and then popping the paint off. I think you guys kind of know what that looks like in housing and so on. You've probably seen some area in a bathroom or something where either the wallpaper, the paint, or even the tile has started to lift off because of the condensation and moisture. So that happens. So over time, sculptures do break down. But with Nefertiti, her sculpture is kind of a mixture of old and new, with this naturalization and looking at it. So she has a mixed result in terms of preservation and the way it is sculpted, if that makes sense. So we lost a bit of an eye, the iris of the eye, and we missed some parts of the ears. But I'm saying all this, but this is incredibly well preserved when you think about having paint that's over 3,000 years old. It's just tremendous. But speaking of the style of the way that she's depicted, during her time, a little bit before, a little after, there was a tendency toward naturalism. It came and went, and they went back to the old style, and nothing really changed until the Romans came another 1,000+ years later. Okay, so this is going to go beyond the simple creating of a likeness. We're trying to show a lot of perfection here. That's part of our idealization here. It does exist. She was a beautiful woman. I think that's been noted in history. But at any rate, she's got an ease-flowing, naturalistic, and elegant look to her because that is the new aesthetic canon. What that means is the aesthetic for this time period, the canon, are the rules, okay? So that is what we want to think of her as, this female beauty that is beyond others, or she excels beyond other beauties. All right, now we're going to move forward in time, 1922, and we're in Japan, and this is a study for the portrait of Okakura Tenshin. Now, his face is emphasizing his inner character. He's a thoughtful person. He wrote the ideals of the East and created the concept of Asia as the East in contrast to the West. And he moved to the United States later and became a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. An amazing place. I lived in Boston for a short while. Incredible Japanese and Chinese art collection there. Absolutely incredible. And he's partly responsible for this. But what he is trying to do is talk about the history of Japanese art and get Western people to accept it. So there's a little back and forth of East and West, and we see this depicted here. So this linear style that we have seen previously in Japanese artworks, this very light application, excuse me, just very linear shapes, or sorry, lines holding the shapes. Boy, I'm tongue-tied today. Holding these different shapes and giving us a sense of the form and the sort of flatness here of this paper. But what changes is, or where we see some changes, there are more, but we see some chiaroscuro here in the hat, meaning some values and three-dimensionality. Okay, a little bit in the face as well. And then, of course, he's smoking a cigarette. We're in 1922. Pretty much everyone in the U.S., I don't know what the percentage is, but it was, for adults, it was probably something like 80% of adults smoked cigarettes at that point. I'm glad that you are not in that world now, but that is how it was. So he's he's embodying some of these beliefs of modernism and tradition, combining, and that's progress in art. And in 1922, and even before this, we go back into the Impressionists, there's a back and forth, East and West, but there's this combining of these styles is here. All right, so if we look at these two side by side, if we go back to a purely Japanese piece here in chapter 13, 13, and this piece is just got these flat areas of color, and I think this is the wrong figure number. I thought that was wrong. I don't think that's still in our book in that way. Well, I think anyway, at any rate, sorry, I don't mean to get too distracted. But this piece, we see a very flat, straight line there. We're getting a little more contoured lines around here. We do have those there, but they're more hard and very continuous and the same thickness, if that makes sense. We have some variability here describing thin and thick, if that makes sense to you, if you can see that. A little bit of shading there. So in her folds of her fabric, there is no shading whatsoever. We don't see any shading around her face. We simply see eyes, nose, and hairline. Okay? So that is a difference that we can see. All right, the portrait of Dr. Gachet. This is so famous. And the film that's out, Loving Vincent. And I'll try to put a link in there somewhere, but you guys have had such a hard time looking at any videos. But what happened, I'll tell you, this happened like 2 years ago. They made a film connecting all of Van Gogh's paintings. So we would have they would act this out, some actors would act this out, and they painted over the film in Van Gogh's style. So it looks like a moving Dr. Gachet, and then he gets up and talks to someone else, and then it mutates into a landscape that Van Gogh painted as well. Because he was in this certain areas of the country, mostly in France, but in this particular one, this is another piece from the Netherlands, his home country in Holland. So it's a really interesting film, but I'll try to include a link. So this focuses on his inner mental emotional state. This is very famous for being a predictor or a conveyance, I guess you could say, of the disillusionment of modern culture. We're in 1890 here. So the idea of all this mechanization and the Industrial Revolution. I can't state the Industrial Revolution enough. The 19th century was overshadowed by coal dust. The clouds were dark at times. The sky was dark, and especially in London. And Europe had a lot of problems with pollution and with noise. And there had never been machine noise. Imagine in a world, if you can, where there was never the sound of a car horn or a engine, or like a motorcycle might go vroom right through your conversation in a living room. You can hear it inside the house. That didn't exist. And then you start to have those things, and you have factories going 24/7, making clanking noises, machine noises drowning out conversations. That had never happened. So people got fairly depressed and upset about this, and this is what Van Gogh is showing. But it's also about him. Van Gogh is 2 months away from his suicide here. He dies not long after this. Gachet was one of his doctors. So it's trying to show different things here, personal and universal, meaning the idea that this guy is frustrated. I guess you could call that societal. He's showing his mental state. So this thick paint, we love his brushstrokes. I just went and saw a similar piece to this in the Norton Simon Museum. They have a lot of Impressionism there in Pasadena and Norton Simon. Gorgeous museum. Free to students. Show your ID. But it's really got these beautiful brushstrokes. I got to look up close at a couple of Van Gogh paintings. But look at it. It just goes all the way around here. But it's showing his agitation and intensity. But it's also